Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. Fundamentals of Harmony is for musicians of all levels who want to go back to basics. I highly recommend this if you're struggling with orchestration or fugue. This will be harmony in the French style, in which we're hearing above and below, and today we'll be listening for cadences for a bass exercise. Let's begin. For these exercises, you always write them down by hand. The hearing on a computer is very shallow, it's very inaccurate, and you will not be developing yourself to the maximum. Make sure that you copy it down correctly because you will be spending several hours, many hours doing this, and you want to make sure that it's based on something that actually works. Next, you want to sing the exercise at different tempos. This is to hear the harmonic potential. Fa, do, re, si, do. I hear a half cadence. Re, do, fa, si, do. I hear another half cadence. Fa, si, do, re, si, do, fa. And I hear a perfect authentic cadence. If you want information about when to use the cadences or how to properly voice them, just check out the CHORDS tutorial I have on my website. Next, you need to write in the Roman numerals. This is especially important if you don't have a teacher and you want to learn on your own because you're going to recognize patterns much quicker. Notice we have a deceptive cadence in the first measure, as well as the second measure, as well as the fourth measure. There are very specific rules about how to properly voice a deceptive cadence. Also notice when the bass moves by step. So in the first measure, second measure, it moves by step. And then the fourth measure, we have a 4, 5, 6, which is a complete progression by step. And the other voices need to move in opposite direction in order to avoid parallel fifths or parallel octaves. The exception, of course, would be the leading tone, which has to go up to the tonic. Let's get the ending cadence. I have leading tone to tonic in the soprano. Harmony in the French style, you always have the leading tone to the tonic. You're not going to have a 2-to-1 exercise. Now we're going to fill in the ending cadence. Some things to remember, you need to have complete chords, so root, third, fifth. Also think about the distances between the voices, so from bass to tenor, maximum distance is the 12th, between alto to soprano or tenor to alto, maximum distance is going to be an eighth. Also think about the pass release resistance, so voices will move as little as possible, though there are some notable exceptions. Next, I test a high soprano. I highly recommend this if you really want to get the most possible, because if you have a mediocre result that then it leaks into your composition, you want the best possible in your harmony exercise so that when you go to compose, you have the best possible as well. My concern here is that the distance from bass to soprano is not going to be manageable. And notice when I test the middle voices that I cannot get a complete chord without proper balance, because here we have a 12th distance from bass to tenor. And though I said that is the maximum, usually it doesn't work because it sounds very thin at 4 voices. It's only through passing motion that the ear, hears it as satisfactory. If you want to do it at 5 voices, what you would have to do is double one of the lines. So here I have a solution where the tenor is doubling the alto at first. So alto does si, sol, la, tenor does si, sol, fa. When you do orchestration, this is very common. You have like a complex 2D passage, and some of the voices are doubling exactly, and then they kind of deviate. Clearly, from this example, I wanted to end with an octave distance from the bass, so I had to break away from the exact doubling. Another possibility would be just do an exact doubling. So the tenor and alto are both doing si, sol, la, but the tenor is down the octave. This gives me a 10th distance from the bass, which is not a problem, but maybe from an orchestration perspective, you want something a little bit more filled in. Now let's get the half cadence. One of the things to think about for a half cadence is what's going to happen afterwards. Notice that we have a 5-to-1. If I put the leading tone in the soprano, it resolves up to the tonic. We have a perfect authentic cadence. It kills the piece. You cannot have a perfect authentic cadence in the middle of an exercise. However, when you get to modulations, for example, right now we're doing season 2 of how to voice through position chords, and we do have modulations, you can have a perfect authentic cadence in the new key, but never in the home key. Therefore, we have an imperfect authentic cadence. So I'm going to test out the third in the soprano. Here's soprano moves by step. Another possibility I tested out is having the third in soprano, but having the soprano arrive by leap. So I test the first solution. Voices move as little as possible through the path of least resistance, and the bass moves by step. Other voices move in the opposite direction. With the soprano leaping down, notice it doesn't work. We have an incomplete chord. We have the root third, so we have no fifth. If you were adamant that you love the soprano and you want to make it work, what you need to do is figure out the voicing, and then work backwards to figure out a voice leading that's going to get you out of it. This will be very important for fugue and orchestration. But notice I can't find a satisfactory solution. So in this first possibility, I have a leading tone in the tenor. It goes down to the C, so we have a complete chord, but then that's an unresolved leading tone. That's not acceptable. Then I have the leading tone in the alto. It goes up to the tonic, but in order to have a fifth in each chord, I have parallel fifths between tenor and bass, which is very, very unacceptable. When you have leaps, especially in the middle voices, there's usually got to be a good reason. For the soprano, it's often for expressive reasons, but for middle voices, it's got to be a good justification. A common scenario would be after a deceptive cadence, they have to leap to rebalance the chord. But here, the tenor is leaping in order to justify a soprano line, so maybe it's a soprano line that has to change. Therefore, we're going to stick with this first possibility. Now let's get in the first cadence, and we're just going to fill in everything we know. And now we're just going to experiment with different soprano lines. I like to start with the third. That usually is a good elevation to start off for these exercises. When I start in the third and follow the path of least resistance, notice that it leads to a perfect authentic cadence in the middle of the exercise. Then I tried starting on the root in soprano, but I get to the same problem. So you have to be very intelligent at a certain point. You have to think ahead. You're seeing a consistent problem, and that's what we call a trap. A trap needs to be regulated. So that trap is that 5-1 in the middle of the exercise. So we're going to preempt it by figuring out a temporary solution. Here I tried placing the third in that soprano and see if I can find something from the beginning that's going to get me to there. Probably I'm going to have to make some adjustment to the soprano line. So here I start on the third, and I look for a moment where I can maybe leap or do something different to get over to the A flat. But notice I'm kind of locked in. We have a lot of stepwise motion where I have to oppose the bass. I have the leading tone that has to go up to the tonic. So the only real spot is this last beat here. So I test out, could I get to that third? And I put the G there. It works nice as a line. But now I got to verify for the middle voices, I don't want parallel fifths or parallel octaves. So here, notice the solution. I have the tenor and soprano swapping. Okay, so it's called a voice exchange. So the soprano does mi, fa, sol. The tenor does sol, fa, mi. And notice that the tenor gets to a unison with the bass, which doesn't occur that often, but is a useful trick to have up your sleeve. With this new solution, which resolves the issue, notice that the subsequent voicing no longer works. It needs to be readjusted. If you want to realize this exercise in full, it's currently up on my website, and I just put a teaser where I filled in the soprano for the cadences. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.